a Starlink is, it's at its core, it is a radio. It has
Fucking what?
1,280 antennas, and it uses eigen beamforming to talk to satellites. But it, at the end of the day, uses radio waves to communicate data.
I did not know that. I don't know. I just assumed, I guess it was like South African space magic.
Yeah.
Like
That too.
I don't know. I genuinely I didn't think about it that hard. It's just like, oh, is it the satellite service
Yeah.
that TV goes on? Maybe that's radios too. I don't know. That's why you guys are here to unretard me.
You're listening to the Art and More podcast with your hosts, Nathan and BR. Nathan is a Canadian illustrator with a couple years of military experience, and BR is a British anarchist that moved to the States. Both are passionate shooters and community builders. Together, they run the Seaburn art page. Enjoy the show.
And hello, welcome back to the Art and More podcast. BR is not here, so I guess I'm doing this this intro alone. Like, God damn it. Okay. Hi. Today we have Alex and Austin of Mojave Repeater here to basically teach retards like me, and probably a lot of you, but mostly me, how to use radios, and also rant about other things.
Sweet. Let's do it.
Hello.
Like, who's going to start? The funny thing, me and Austin were just talking about this before we jumped on, but great awkward silence to start it off. We're both pretty nervous.
We'll get rid of that in post.
Yeah.
No, we just thought it was funny. Like, I always get nervous doing these things, like long form talking content. I think I'm better at like writing, thinking things out.
Your guides and stuff have taught me a ton.
Right. Cool. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
Oh, anytime. I've been putting off like the radio episode. I think Austin, you and I talked about doing this at SHOT Show. And we've been like playing with the idea on and off for over a year. But I think it could bring a lot of value to a lot of people, myself included. Like, as usual, I will say this is a very self-indulgent podcast where I talk to people because I want to learn things, and I'm a retard with a Baoefeng that barely knows how to use it. So,
yeah. Well, and like you said, I think it's actually a really good time for this episode because quote unquote radio culture has developed out over the past few years. And what kind of prompted us to like finally set the schedule in stone to do this episode was the cell phone outages that happened. What is it, like last week at this point?
Yeah.
And what I found really interesting is the questions I was getting wasn't just like, hey, how do I talk simplex comms, voice to voice. I think people are now kind of progressing to where they can self-guide through those problems. The questions I got were a little bit more complex. Like, how do I talk the next state over? How do I develop out infrastructure to pass data back and forth and not be reliant on cell service in that way? Yeah. So not just mesh networking, but just, and honestly, they didn't know what the solution looked like. Most of the people that asked, which is why I try to give some options to prompt people to think about. But I do think that comms is now a couple of years downstream of people having a general awareness of how simplex comms work. And now people are wanting to learn more and more about digital systems and infrastructure.
Yeah. I assume by when you say simplex comms, my brother in Christ, I'm retarded. I'm assuming you mean like a Baoefeng.
Yeah. So simplex itself is an act. It's not any specific type of platform, but it's one radio talking to another radio, just direct to each other. One is sending radio waves, the other's receiving radio waves. Then that's a simplex comms.
Yeah. I think, one of the interesting things was that probably one of the most common questions that I get asked, that we get asked, is about the fear of the cell phone, going down, the cell phone outages, right? And it's like, I'm not one to peddle fear, but it's interesting that it manifested itself and kind of showed us how real that it can be. Something that is in our pockets that we use literally 24/7 is not a sure thing when you rely on somebody else for that critical service. So, it's interesting that it's manifested itself. And to your point about, your self-deprecating humor about being retarded and your selfish desire to invite us on to like learn more, invite other folks on to learn from those disciplines, just as like a regular dude, I think there's great value in that for the larger community, just being able to have the platform to share that message, because your desire is widespread. It's not, you're not the only one who has a desire to learn more about these things. So
I
definitely
think
appreciate being here.
Oh man, anytime. It's my pleasure. I've been again looking forward to this for a really long time, but every once in a while I'll put up a poll being like, "Hey guys, what guides would you like us to do?" And all kinds of stuff, from like how to draw a pistol from a holster, or like how to raise chickens in your backyard, just everything. But the one probably the most common is comms.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of
Oh, wow.
people,
Interesting.
yeah, this is not a joke. I think most people want to know, at least like a vast majority of the people I know have something. Like they have a Baoefeng in
Yeah.
their closet, but
Yeah.
I would liken it to kind of like having a Glock and not knowing how to use it. Like you
Yeah.
don't actually know
Yeah,
anything that goes
definitely.
into it. So what I was kind of hoping to do today was to pick your guys' brain for, hey, I'm radio dumb. I don't know what I'm doing. Cool. Like
Yeah.
you can shoot 0.2 second split times or less, but like what do these funky buttons do? I pressed a button on my Baoefeng and now it's making an alarm. What do?
Yeah.
Um, for the average person, where do you get started? What is a mesh network and why is it really cool? How do you transmit data over radio waves, and like why is that something that's important? I completely agree with, hey, cellular infrastructure is not bulletproof. Like
Mhm.
all infrastructure
Mhm.
isn't bulletproof, and we saw last week, when this comes out probably 2 or 3 weeks, um, sometimes cell service just stops going. What did
Yeah.
they say that it was? A solar flare? I, I'm going to keep my thoughts about that to myself. But
Yeah.
but you never know. I remember when I had a hurricane in my home town of Halifax. We lost cellular service for about a day, and that was, people are
Oh,
picking up
wow.
the pieces of their houses. Like there's no power,
Yeah.
no nothing. Streets are flooded. Yet no one can talk to each other because how many people own a radio.
Yeah.
My friends and I
Yeah.
do, but we barely know how
Yeah.
to use them, and it's mostly just line of sight stuff when we do.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So you
yep,
you bring up a really good point there, which is, context is everything.
yeah,
And I think, I don't want to say the biggest mistakes, but like one of the hurdles to having the conversation of like, quote unquote, what radio to buy, or quote unquote, where to start, is we have to decide on what our context is, right? I think we all understand that there's a need for comms, but the tools you select vary on your context, right? If there's a hurricane, the radio that I want access to is going to be very different from I'm being occupied by a foreign nation state and
yes,
I need to coordinate guerrilla efforts, right? Those both have serious needs for comms,
yes,
but the way I would execute on those and the things that are going to set me up for success and to be flexible are going to be probably two very different tools. So context is everything when we talk about the sphere in which radios are employed.
yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, that's something we absolutely preach often, is that people want the easy button. They want the do-it-all solution, which doesn't necessarily exist. Unfortunately, really in any discipline, there's not a firearm that can both, shoot out to 1,000 yards, but also be great for CQB or things like that, right?
yeah. Be
So,
concealed carried on your person, even.
right, exactly.
Right.
So, yeah, it's important to frame the problem and be realistic with yourself about how you see yourself employing those capabilities. Like, what situations would you put yourself in that you might need to use that capability? And then, kind of the answer reveals itself the more that you
Mhm.
learn about different communication systems and capabilities therein.
Right. And I know we talked about this a little bit in the primer before we started recording, but a big part of the philosophy of Mojave Repeater is developing out individuals to be able to, one, troubleshoot and use radios themselves, but also be able to think critically about building out a criteria for what type of problem am I trying to solve here, and how do I find the resources to select the right tool for the job.
Mhm. Yeah, so that brings us to I think probably a good starting point. Do you want to try to answer the question, where do you begin?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I guess on that, I won't, I don't want to monopolize your podcast here, but if we can, I think that's a great place to begin.
No, please monopolize away. That's the whole point. We're picking your brain. I'm just here listening to you guys. Just, oh, that makes sense.
Definitely.
I am learning.
Yeah.
So no, please.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, a good place to start, from my experience in the military, what they teach to amateur, like junior radio operators, is buttonology, right? Like that in and of itself can only take you so far.
Buttonology? Sorry.
Yeah, buttonology, right? Like how to actually program a radio to do a thing. Without the context, right? Without the understanding of RF theory and planning considerations, that buttonology can only take you so far. But it's a good place to start, right? So, like, I think picking up a very basic analog two-way radio, you don't need to jump to the $1,000 high-quality solution right away. But picking up something like a Baoefeng and then learning that buttonology, how to manipulate the radio, how to program it, is a good place to start. Then you can use that learning tool, which is really what it is. I don't recommend a Baoefeng for anything more than a learning tool. But it's a good thing to have fun with, and it's a good way to learn RF propagation, RF theory, to start to understand these things a little bit deeper and what the implications of those things are for your communications planning. So that's where I really recommend people to start at. It's not a bad idea to get a ham radio license, because then that gives you somebody else to talk to. My opinion has changed about that. I'm not necessarily like pro licensing. Like, I don't think it should be a requirement per se, although it is in a lot of cases. It's a good way, like, shutting yourself out from a potential avenue to learn something is never a good thing, right? Like,
yes.
So if you can get that ham licensing and talk to somebody on the radio, then there's great benefit in that.
That's actually something I've heard from a lot of people, even some of the most like, hey, I don't want to be on any list. I don't want to, the most like anarcho, I want to be outside the system people. I have never met one that says don't get your ham radio license purely because of how much it teaches you through the process. Mm-hmm. And I guess if you're really that set on not being on a registry, just do all of it and then just don't get the license itself, I suppose. Yeah. But everyone I know seems to have their base of knowledge through that.
Yeah. Sorry to break it to anybody, but if you're born in America, like you're tracked and tagged in so many different ways. But yeah, it's funny. It's funny you say that, Alex, because I've listened to your opinion on that change quite a little bit on ham radio licensing and the potential benefits. Again, I'm not advocating or discouraging people from one way or the other, but one of the benefits I see from ham radio is you can learn a lot about troubleshooting your radio and start to develop out an understanding of the way your radio interacts with the physical world around you. And you don't necessarily need a buddy to help you out with that, because there's a pool of locals who can aid and guide in your troubleshooting methods and help out with you experimenting. I remember very early on in getting my ham license and being able to hit the repeater from standing inside my garage, but a guy saying, hey, it's really hard to understand you. So I left my garage, went and stood on top of a hill, and the guy was like, oh, I can hear you much clearer now. So you learn, you're able to kind of self-guide yourself through. It's very intuitive. You might not necessarily be able to articulate it, or it might not be necessarily articulated to you, but you start to learn kind of the art behind the way the physical world around you and troubleshooting your radio. If you get your ham license, it opens up those resources to you.
Right. Yeah. I think, the other thing about that, maybe the part of my opinion about it that hasn't necessarily changed, is in the community aspect of ham radio. While it's good for teaching you and learning things, they may not share the same perspective that you do with respect to preparedness. A lot of ham radio operators do. However, they are more strictly limited by those restrictions that are put in place through the ham rules. And when I talk about radio stuff, what I want to talk about is the capability that exists and not the restrictions and the rules that tell us what we can't do. Just because there is a rule that says that you can't do it doesn't mean that the capability is not there to be employed in, let's say, an emergency situation or something that you shouldn't be aware of. So if you approach it with caution in that respect and understand that there's a different perspective in that community of people, but you can extract a lot of valuable knowledge and experience from that group.
Yeah, I find it super interesting. When I was up in North Carolina, we did a little meet and greet and stuff at AWS, but we also did a bit of a hike beforehand with some friends. And that whole weekend was a bachelor party for a fella. And what we had set up for him was basically like 3 days of training. And one of the modules of that training that I wish I knew more to fully utilize was setting up a ham radio in a way, like building an antenna off of a tree. And keep in mind we're in North Carolina. They set the antenna up, and we talked to someone in Colorado, and I found that super interesting. Could I tell you a damn thing about it? Fuck no. I don't know. I wish I could glean more than that, but unfortunately, I'm still at a very beginner stage of all of this. But it is really cool and useful how it can be utilized.
Yeah, so I think you both are kind of hitting on the same thing, which is that the art of the possible, right? Where you will find the limit in the ham community pretty quickly is there. It's a very narrow scope of what radio communications is capable of, and in a lot of ways, part of the questions I see developing right now around comms culture is people are still very much inside the nebula of what technology exists and what is out there and what tools people can have access to that they might not necessarily consider when it comes to comms. I mean, I know even myself 2 years ago, I would never have considered like owning a Starlink to be part of a comms plan in the way that I do now. And now that's because my mind has been opened to a little bit more abstract thinking. I'm now able to see that as a potential tool and how I can implement that and fold that into my comms plan beyond just a Baoefeng or a DMR radio.
That's actually really interesting. I never would have thought of fucking Starlink. I guess it does stand outside. I guess you can work that into your pace plan. Fuck it. But yeah, no, that completely Greek to me, but that is so cool. I know that it is.
A Starlink is a radio. A Starlink is at its core, it is a radio. It has 1,280 antennas and uses eigen beamforming to talk to satellites, but it at the end of the day uses radio waves to communicate data.
I did not know that. I don't know. I just assumed, I guess it was like South African space magic. Like
that too.
I don't know. I genuinely I didn't think about it that hard. It's just like, oh, is it the satellite service that TV goes on? Maybe that's radios too. I don't know. That's why you guys are here to unretard me.
Maybe we could hit on that. So what do you say, or I guess how would you go about? Because I have my thoughts, so I'm curious your thoughts. How would you go about getting people to broaden their scope or open their mind up to what is out there beyond just simplex radio? Just talking end to end, radio to radio. How do you start? Because I know it's a culture thing, and I know you've done a really good job of expanding people's minds that you've come in contact with. How do you get people to start to broaden their expectations of what tools are at their disposal to set up a comms plan?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the first thing that people don't often realize is really how many radios that you interact with on a daily basis, right? You have your cell phone, which has multiple radios and receivers in it, from the cellular component to the Bluetooth, SOS ping, things like that, RFID, and NFC. You have your key fob for your car, right, which is how you unlock and lock your car. Like that is a radio in and of itself. You have radios that do different things. Like you might have a Ring doorbell or Ring security system in your house. Those are all operated on wireless, radio technology for the purpose of transmitting video. So understanding that any wireless technology really that we interact with on a daily basis is probably transported on radio waves. And the limiting factor with a lot of that stuff is that it's all reliant upon infrastructure which you don't control. It's all centralized infrastructure, which is how they create a model for charging people for that service, right? So they all run it through the internet, and then now that is out of your hands, and you have to pay somebody to access that feature. So if you simply look at those things, the services that you utilize in your day-to-day life, and say, what is the analog for something that I can control that is an infrastructure network that I can establish and have full control over? And then you start looking for solutions there. Whether it's wanting to transport video or wanting to have internet services that are not reliant on centralized infrastructure, because you can put up, internet networks, wireless internet networks, or intranet networks per se, and then servers locally that can serve websites, that can, provide security, VPNs, things like that, or transport video, or run, let's say, an ATAC server, for example. You could run that all on local infrastructure as a analog to the centralized infrastructure, and that is fully under your control. You can buy radios for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, understanding the things around us, what are the critical services that we need, that we utilize and interact with on a daily basis, and then finding those solutions that are off grid, so to speak.
That is really, because I remember seeing some stuff from you guys a while ago. Like the end goal of all of this is like decentralization, like to an infrastructure level, like basically an internet that no one can turn off. And in my mind, when I saw that, it jumped to some places in Europe, like during protests and riots, and in Asia and Africa, the first thing that the government does in times of civil unrest is they shut off the internet. And then cell service, and even that movie, what was it? It was on Netflix not very long ago. What was it called? The entire thing started with an infrastructure outage, and no one knew what was going on.
I don't know.
Well, I want to say the Red Dawn remake, but because I'm too young for the original. But I know what happens in that movie.
Leave the World Behind. That's it.
Okay, I haven't seen that. I've heard it's great though.
Yeah, that's what it deals with, and the primary plot was around. Basically, the first thing to go is internet and cell service. The next thing to go is power. The next thing to go is so and so, and just the confused state of isolation that everyone was in. Not knowing what's going on. There's nothing on the television. There's nothing. You can't text anyone. You're suddenly isolated, and it got me really thinking about this episode for one. But two, ways to insulate yourself against that. So I guess it would be best to start us with like the micro and then move up to the macro. Like first, hey, you have your friends, you have, people living across a city or a town or whatever. What should I'm not even going to be in like, what should your pace plan be? That's person and situation dependent. But all other things being equal, you're not guerrillas running through the woods. What would you say that a group of people, or even on an individual level, maybe even a household, should focus on first, other than, your radio license and getting a Baoefeng? After, you figured out your buttonology and how things work.
Yeah, that's a great question. If I may.
No,
I think, so, right, the first step, the first foray into the radio world is two-way voice, right? And so we talked about the whole infrastructure networks and a lot of the wild capabilities that you can provide with some more fancy technologies, radio technologies. But how do we get from that Baoefeng to that infrastructure network, right? So it starts with two-way voice. So establishing a two-way voice network really within your community, trying to promote and promulgate radio two-way voice to your friends, family, etc. I mean, you can do this just like Austin was saying with simplex comms. Everybody gets a Baoefeng, and then you try to see, okay, what are the coverage areas that we have? Where can I reach out to with that radio? Try to understand your physical environment and where you'll be able to reach your friends at and develop a plan from there, right? And then how you grow from that into like providing those critical services through an infrastructure network is just interrogating those capabilities for what they can provide you, right? So from the Baoefeng to a analog voice, then you might want to consider something that's digital, right? Digital radios like DMR and P.25 can provide security, encryption. Then it adds a text messaging component to it. Okay, that's really interesting. Now, how do we take that voice network and expand our coverage area and provide that off-grid infrastructure for our community? You might want to look at repeaters then, for example. If a community of people comes together and let's say a business has a property at the position of advantage within a community, they're at the highest peak in terms of elevation, or they have the tallest building, right? One of those business owners that's a part of the community offers to host the repeater at their business site, right? Then you now have a more robust infrastructure network. You think about backup power too. That's critically important to this whole concept. That's how you really get into establishing these infrastructure networks. Then you can kind of go, down the rabbit hole in terms of more complex things, right? Adding layers to like that pace plan, like you said. Okay, now we have two-way voice covered with infrastructure. How do we want to provide now geolocation, right? Position and location information for our community, for people that matter to us. Now you might start to be looking at mesh networking solutions, right? Maybe it's something that's a little bit more mobile, which is great. But you can do the same thing, right? Put up a mesh relay node in that same location alongside that two-way voice repeater. And now you have basically created a little bit of diversity in that pace plan to where you have solutions for now two-way voice and position and location information. So that's kind of how you develop that, starting really from the ground up.
That is that answered question like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, you can get really, really crazy with it. Something that I like to advocate for is like, okay, those handhelds, that's going to give you a coverage area. Those handheld like VHF, UHF radios, it's going to be a very limited coverage area. The next question you might start asking yourself is like range limitations, right? So you can do things like add satellite radios or satellite phones to your pace plan. Right now we're kind of getting after that range limitation with a relatively affordable solution to be able to reach out across the country if I want to.
Yeah. So one of the things that I don't mean to interject.
No. Neither of you are interjecting in any way. Don't worry.
The other thing that I see people, the common mistake I see people make is that they think that they have to buy all in on one specific product or one specific ecosystem or style. I'm even guilty of this myself, and
me too.
Alex is helpful at expanding my my thought process. But you can intermix different types of technologies if it solves a problem. If all of my guys in one area have DMR and we can all talk amongst ourselves, and we have another team of guys, on the other end of Houston, I'm in the Houston area. Well, our simplex comms can't reach that far, but we get a lot of benefits out of our DMR radios. They're encrypted. Well, we can have a Starlink on each end with a radio over IP gateway, and then all of us can still talk on the DMR radios that we love. We just intermixed a little bit of technology to defeat that one specific problem, right? So that's another area to start thinking kind of three-dimensionally is every single infrastructure and every single protocol out there is going to have its advantages and disadvantages, but you can find ways to interweave those and to exploit the benefits of one and nullify the drawbacks of another.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. Using different tools together absolutely makes sense. God, this is so much to think about. We are like half an hour in, and I'm like, oh, I'm still stuck on like, was Starlink is a radio? What the fuck? But I am going to have you guys slow down a little bit and talk about some of the terminology that you're using, because like I more or less know what a DMR radio is, but a lot of the people listening to this may not. A lot of the people listening to this may be like still kind of reeling from the fact that their Ring camera is indeed a radio. So
Yeah.
would you mind breaking that down for us? And same with the two big pieces of terminology I'd like you to kind of glossary for us would be, what is a DMR and what is a repeater?
Yeah, for
yes,
sure.
Absolutely. So those are two great questions to answer. So DMR is it is a type of digital language that radios can speak. It is an open source language, so different manufacturers can program their radios to talk on DMR. It was developed by Motorola. They call it Moto Turbo. Everyone else just calls it DMR, but they're one and the same. So it is a digital language. It is a way data gets encoded. And I'm very deliberate to say encoded because it's not necessarily encrypted, but you can add an encryption layer on top of the DMR language. You can add AES 256, or some manufacturers have their own native encryption. But that encoding, it being a digital communication, it is ones and zeros being transmitted through the air. And because of that, digital radios, both DMR and P25 is another just standard of digital communication. Both of them offer a really high level of clarity and a lot more resiliency to interference that you don't get with analog. And that's something that is really worth talking about, is that they are going to sound much better, and they're going to do a lot better in radio congested environments because of the way they are structured. So it's a digital language, and it encodes it to ones and zeros rather than just modulating the carrier frequency to transmit sound. Does that make sense?
No, that absolutely does.
BR here with a quick word from our newest sponsor of the show that made our first video podcast possible, the great people over at Attorneys for Freedom. Attorneys for Freedom are a real criminal defense law firm offering attorneys on retainer for legal representation in self-defense cases, and are not some insurance company or provider. This means that Attorneys for Freedom are able to cover scenarios that are often denied coverage by other programs. Self-defense scenarios such as while in gun-free zones or sensitive areas, while under the influence or on medication, scenarios where you knew your attacker, and while using any weapon in self-defense, from a firearm to a household object or otherwise. Additionally, Attorneys for Freedom will not drop you from coverage, nor will they ever ask you to pay them back. Even if you take a plea deal where you admit guilt to a criminal act, Attorneys for Freedom will not ask to recoup their fees. Attorneys for Freedom covers 100% of your attorney's fees in the event they can reasonably argue that you were acting in self-defense, and now you're facing serious felony charges. The primary key to coverage is their ability to reasonably argue self-defense in court. Nathan and I have signed up already, and you can too in no time at all. The National Self-Protection Plan is available with a one-time sign-up fee of $100 and just $35 per month after that. Family plans and annual rates are also available. Signing up via the link in the show notes or via the Seaburn Art Instagram bio link helps support the show with both your initial sign-up and every month you retain Attorneys for Freedom services. Get covered in all 50 states, support the show, and have peace of mind that should your worst day come, Attorneys for Freedom has your back. Thanks for listening, people. How's it going, lads and ladies? BR here with a quick word from the longest running sponsor of the Art and War podcast, Advanced Warfighting Solutions. AWS have been making tough as hell gear for decades right here in the US in North Carolina. Nathan, myself, and thousands of others run that gear through the ringer and trust our lives to it, whether that's LARPing in the woods or dragging kit through war zones. AWS manufactures many great packs, pouches, plate carriers, and our personal favorite, the SMU Operator Belt. A set-and-forget gun belt that crushes in build quality, capability, and excellent feedback from its many users. We are tough on our gear here at Art and War, and the SMU takes that treatment in its stride. Though already at a sweet price point, you can knock $10 more off your SMU belt with the code ARTandWar10 at awsin.com. The code and link to the AWS website can be found in the show description. Thanks for listening, now let's get back to the show.
No, not to I really, really, really want to avoid this podcast. As you said before, like a lot of people want to be like, yes, I want to buy product, like consume radio, become good at radio from having radio. So I'm trying my very best to avoid being like, hey, what would you imagine people start with? Like, hey, we've bought your Baoefeng. We're going to move up to DMR and we're going to try and increase our capabilities. But for those that are interested, please, if you're listening to this, please don't immediately like go buy the thing, then don't use the thing. What would you recommend people's next step be for, say, moving to DMR?
So
go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. So basically, I've thought about this a lot, right? I have basically the whole like radio market mapped out in my head from the $25 radio to the $10,000 radio.
Yeah.
So your first step is that Baoefeng, right? An analog $25 analog FM dual band VHF UHF radio. The next step, right, that a lot of people see is like if you want to buy brand new radios, the most affordable way to do that is to get into DMR, which has historically been a commercial market offering. But the DMR radios are like $1,000. Now, in between that, there's a lot of wiggle room as well. So from that $25 radio, now anywhere from $25 to $200, there's varying quality and capability of analog radios, right? So you might be looking at different ham radio transceivers, things of that nature. And a lot of the cheaper, like Chinese, Amazon type, like not super reputable manufacturers.
I had a Redivis at one point.
Exactly.
That's actually
would fall in
there. Yeah. Sorry, continue.
Yeah. But so there's some room within that category. Then going on to like $200-$300 range, even up to $500 range. There's a lot of DMR radios on like the Amazon market. Once again, they might not be of the highest quality, but they're out there, right, for new purchases. Then anywhere from that $1 to $1,000 range, you can find a lot of really great, like high quality stuff that's secondhand. So whether it's a Motorola that came out of a commercial application that goes up on eBay, or like a Hytera radio that you can buy secondhand, you can buy a lot of great stuff secondhand within that range. And really it just goes up from there, right? Then you have like DMR radios, brand new, are going to start around $1,000, or even like from the $500 to $1,000 range, you can get DMR radios that are like more limited in capability in some way. Like maybe they aren't capable of encryption or they don't have a full keypad. Then like the $1,000 range is where you're going to get your higher quality, full keypad, encryption capable DMR radios. Then going on from there, P.25 is a little bit more expensive for brand new equipment. You can also, once again, find that stuff in the sub $1,000 range secondhand. But the P.25 stuff gets a little bit more expensive. Then if you want to expand your capabilities even further, like multi-band, multi-protocol radios, like Motorola APX 8000 or the Viking VP 8000, for example, those can do, at least the Viking can do P.25 and DMR, VHF, UHF, and 700-800 megahertz range, which is huge capability set. But it's like $5,000 to $7,000, so it scales with capability. And if you want to be, frugal about it, you can shop secondhand and find some deals. So there's a lot there.
That's where I fall in. I am a certified cheap ass.
Yeah, same.
So
same. I love secondhand. Like I love that shit.
So the other thing the other thing I love about, so I buy a lot of radios, especially the Hyteras. I buy a lot of them secondhand on eBay for two reasons. One, they're cheap. Two, they have like a survivorship bias. Like if they've lived long enough through whatever life they had, they're probably going to do okay. I've only ever had one just stop working 100%. But also the intended application. So like Alex said, you're going to find a lot of secondhand radios that they were intended for, like he talked about, the people who only ever hit the buttonology level training. They were meant to be least common denominator, super easy to work. They're going to be generally what we would call featureless radios. So they may or may not have an LCD screen. If they do, they're not going to have a lot of features in them. And I love those radios because they're, I don't know if I'd use the word disposable, but they're borderline disposable in that I can have a fleet of them, like the 6 Hyteras I have, and they make great handout radios to augment a team on short notice, right? So if my guys get together and we have to have, coverage of a certain area, and maybe not everyone is on the same page with our comms plan, or some guys we're still working and budgeting to get a DMR radio to fit within our base plan, I can just hand them one. If it gets lost, I'm out $80 or whatever it might be, which I'm not going to cry over. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one other big benefit of buying secondhand, especially if you're going to be the quote unquote radio guy for your team and you're going to spend more than the average member of your group of guys that you train with.
Yeah.
At least on
that's
the radio aspect.
The more time that goes on, like every group seems to have someone who, like a lot of the guys that I run into, like they all want to know radios, but no one wants to put the time. And this is true of me as well. Until fairly recently, no one wants to put the time involved into something so technical so there's usually one dedicated guy that knows basically everything, and everyone else is just like, oh, push button, make monkey talk. But yeah, that actually seems really interesting. I just like secondhand because I'm a cheap ass, and usually if it's from a reputable seller, if it's from a reputable seller and it's been around for a little bit, like then kind of what you said with survivorship bias, it's more likely that it's going to survive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can absolutely score some great deals secondhand. The most important thing that I will caution people is to just get educated about the product that you're purchasing, because people a lot of times with the radio stuff, it's like buying a gun and not understanding the specs. Like, oh, why does this pistol not take 5.56? I bought a shit ton of 5.56. Why doesn't my pistol shoot 5.56? Well, you didn't buy a 5.56 gun. You bought a pistol that shoots 9mm, So like get educated about that product before you pull the trigger on it, to understand, the capabilities of it. Like if you're wanting if all your friends have radios, you should go look at the specs of those radios before you buy the one that you're going to get secondhand, right? Or go ask somebody that might know, because like if they all have VHF radios, you're going to want to get a VHF radio. If they all have DMR radios, you're going to want to get a DMR. If they all have encryption, you're going to want to make sure that you get encryption on your radio. And a lot of the specs of those are not like very well advertised in some of these eBay listings. So just make sure that you do your homework, ask your friends and your buddies what they got before you pull the trigger on a secondhand radio, because you don't want to end up with just a paperweight.
This is a very dumb question.
That's a really good point.
But like encryption protocols. So say you have an encrypted radio from, say, Motorola, or I don't know, Yaesu or Retevis or whatever, and someone else buys another radio that's capable of 256-bit encryption or whatever. You two have two different brands of radios. Can you talk to each other potentially with the?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as long as the protocol of that radio matches, right? So if it's DMR and somebody else has a DMR radio, and as long as it's the same encryption method, so AES 256, for example, then they will talk, right? The thing that you get into is like, if you buy some of those cheaper like Amazon type radios, sometimes the way that they have implemented the encryption method into the software in those radios doesn't exactly jive with other manufacturers and like the standard, right? The open source standard across the board. So that's where you got to like be a little bit careful and read the reviews. But as a general rule, as long as the protocol matches, so DMR and DMR, and as long as the encryption method, AES-256 and the like, then they should talk. And likewise with P25, you know, P25 to P25, same encryption method, they should talk.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
That's actually
I'll
a
give
misconception
you,
that I've,
Yeah, I'll give you some additional context. So I know no one's going to see this because it's a podcast, but most of the guys I run with, we have Hyteras, because that's what I kind of started with, and so they built a lot of their kit around that. Well, one guy, he moved from a different area, and he had an APX 8K, and so he was all set up for P25. Wasn't the end of the world. He was happy to switch over, but he had invested so much money in his accessories. And what he actually did was he found a Motorola, which is what I'm holding up now, that was DMR that took the same accessories. And so I, as the comms guy, the burden fell on me to get the software and figure out how to program it and get it talking. It talks on our comms plan, no problem. But that was another consideration that he had to make, right? Was that he had already spent thousands of dollars on a accessory ecosystem. And so when he went to go shop for a radio, it wasn't as simple as, oh, everyone has Hytera, I'm going to buy Hytera. Then it became, is there something that sits in the middle that it takes my current accessory infrastructure, but is now going to be able to talk to this new protocol? And so he had to do a lot more research to land on this Motorola that he purchased.
That's a great point.
I had no idea actually what the answer to that question was going to be. I thought it was actually going to be like, no, shut up. They don't work together. No. So I'm pleasantly surprised.
And that is the benefit of there being these protocols and there being these standards, is again going back to being able to kind of think three-dimensionally and think beyond the brand, is that when you know that this type of protocol means a standardization across manufacturers, you can start to take advantages of the little nuances and feature sets and accessory connectors that exist out there.
So now I'm going to say something that's going to basically throw all that out the window, right? So the funny thing is, like, you can pretty much make radios do like whatever you want them to, if you're willing to make the appropriate investment, right? Yeah. So voice is the input, voice is the output, regardless of the modulation technology that's built into the radio, what protocol, DMR, P25, analog, etc. Yeah. So for years, public safety has been doing this. The departments that get it, that have like radio guys on staff, the counties, municipalities, et cetera, they have cracked the nut on interoperability, right? That's always a huge problem, because when a county gets overwhelmed during an emergency management scenario and they bring in a neighboring county, now they have to figure out how can they lay this comms plan flat and interoperate amongst those communities. So there are ways to create interoperability amongst your radios, right? So like what they've historically used is a system called a patch, right? Which is a radio interoperability gateway. So you have like basically a black box that you can plug multiple radios of different technologies into, and then have them be able to bridge those two networks together. So you can have voice going both ways. We see that implemented today in technology called ROIP, or Radio over Internet Protocol, where you have a network appliance that you plug your radio into, and now that is translated into IP traffic, which can be transported either or transmitted out of another radio or transported over the network to a distant station, for example, in a completely different part of the world. Ham radio guys do this, right? So they have repeaters that have protocols like Echolink and P25 and DMR reflectors, which run that. They basically pipe that voice through a server, and they're able to get a network of repeaters all on the same bridged IP network And it doesn't really matter what handheld you're on. You can still talk to other ham radio operators around the world through that IP site connected or ROIP network. So, at the most basic level, right? Like, get the thing that your friends have, but just understand that as you go down this rabbit hole, there are ways to solve those problems, depending on the level of investment in terms of cost and time that you want to make to learn these things, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point too. That's one thing that I don't know necessarily gets talked about enough, but like going back to the example of my one friend that didn't have to, but it worked out best for him to buy a Motorola. Well, I still had to learn how to use an entirely new programming software to get him talking on our comms plan. It wasn't a simple copy paste in the usual programming software I use. I had to learn a whole new infrastructure. That was fine. That's part of the burden I share as my group, being able to work together and train together and be the best that we can. But it was nonetheless a time investment. So yeah, those are, I mean, the only two things in your way are time and money, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So what's that triangle again? Like cost, time, and quality. You can choose two.
Yeah. And sleep
Right.
and relationships and work. Like there's so many points to that triangle. I mean,
yeah. But I feel like I know so many people, and I'm kind of guilty of this. I'm absolutely guilty of this, and I'm going to take the L a little bit here, that have like end goals, like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 lasers strapped to their rifle, like $20,000 rigs, dual tube night vision, like nice overlanding trucks, all of that stuff, and they still run around with a Baoefeng.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who put me onto that and who made me notice it for the first time. And it's like, no, now I can't stop noticing it. Now it's like most of the people I know. And
right.
like, I've used the Baoefeng a little bit. I remember, my friends back in town would say, oh, if the big hot dog eating contest ever happens and we wake up to air raid sirens or something, our emergency frequency we'll all tune into is going to be like 420-690.
The golden frequency.
The golden frequency that I'm sure everyone's on.
Yeah.
Love it.
But yeah, I don't know. Like if the big hot dog eating contest ever does happen, I'm going to tune into 420-690 just to see what the fuck is going on.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but
like the Party Rock channel.
You bring up a great point. I mean, there is such a balance, and we're often like off balanced in certain respects, and people are surprised to learn what the cost of radio things actually is. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, compare these costs to something else that you've already bought, and it's like, okay, maybe I can scale that capability back a little bit. While it's still important, maybe I spread the love to some of the other things that make me more well-rounded, it's anything, right? Like investing in your personal fitness, right? Like your health, like buying that gym membership or whatever it is, or, buying medical supplies, like, or food, to prep with. Like there's so many things that we neglect, that deserve our attention. I
agree. And I think communication's a big one.
Yeah.
I like to look at the positive aspect there, right? Like we've identified this problem, or comedic as it may be. The one real benefit to that, or the one thing that's worth acknowledging there, is that there are people out there who are willing to pay for quality so long as they understand the quality that they are buying, right? We know that there's significant value bump in going from a D-ball A3 to a mall, right? Because the culture ingrains that in us, right? And so at least it's been my impression that people are willing to pay for quality, provided that they first understand the quality and the reasons to buy in at that price point and why things cost that much. Once that's kind of explained, right? And that's where we're still, that's where I think we're definitely on the upwards track culturally, but it's still very nebulous to a lot of people. So I get it, but that actually gives me a lot of hope, because if people will spend $4,000 on a Mall C1 Plus, I don't think it's a stretch that when they understand the value, that they'll spend $1,000 on a good Hytera or a Motorola.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that I always try to promote, be objective, look at things, take things for their capabilities and limitations, try to gain a full picture of that, and develop your education and your training and your knowledge before you invest in a material solution. Because $500 spent in training might result in you getting the full value out of that $1,000 handheld radio, or saving money in the long term because you sought education in that topic before you sought a material solution. Because nobody wants to buy something that's going to sit on a shelf and never get used because you don't understand it.
And I think part of the difficulty too is like, hey, you and I are talking. Let's both agree that we're going to get, I don't know, like Hytera, insert model number here. Now you got like 8 guys, and you're asking 8 people, some of which are just like, yeah, training cool, guns cool, radios not as cool. I only have so much money and time I can invest into this certain thing at any given point. You're the more people that get involved and the more people that get into this particular thing, the more people you're trying to tell, hey, you got to drop, I don't know, $800 to $1,000 on this one piece of technology that's not sexy but is important. And I feel a lot of people aren't really willing to make that plunge.
Yeah, definitely. I'm never, people have different situations, and I will never try to pressure somebody into spending money where they don't have it, or otherwise just don't want to spend the money. I just like to present to them what is the capability that you can get for that. And if you can evaluate your own situation and see that as a necessity, then by all means, buy that equipment, right? People just don't understand a lot of times what the capability that they get for that dollar spent is. And that's why they don't see it as sexy. I mean, from my perspective, so I was a part of an artillery battalion in the Marines, and it's like, I never shot my weapon, I hardly ever used my M16, or M4. But you use a radio to call for fire, and it's like the violence of action that brings, and like the capability that can bring, versus one dude with an M4. It's completely, it's completely unbalanced. You can gain so much more capability by using that radio to call the right person a lot of times than you can by being the lone wolf with one, rifle at the ready to defend whatever it is, right? So I try to present people with those questions and let them objectively assess their own situation as far as whether they see that they need that solution or not. But I'll never try to pressure somebody into making that purchase,
Yeah. No, I agree. It is it's kind of a lot to ask of someone, but at the same time, so is a water filter, and that's not really sexy either. And
right.
I think one of the worst things that can possibly happen in an emergency situation, like insert whatever LARP, anything from a flood to a hurricane to, I don't know, the things, fucking North Korean paratroopers. Who fucking cares? God
Right.
help, the government. I don't know. Fucking Barney wins the election, and purple dinosaur troops running down the street. Now we gotta dig out the, I don't know, scars and fight them all.
Yeah.
It's going to lead to entirely different situations. But the point is, if no one has anything nor knows anything to do, everyone's just going to be isolated. The day the infrastructure fails, what you have on you is it. And if you don't have any access to information, if you don't have any access to talking with other people, you're fucked.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things that I see trending as a discussion point right now, and I understand where it originates from. It originates actually from some degree of education. I see a lot of people right now saying, I understand that there's a lot of risks associated with keying up, especially like an analog Baoefeng, with the proliferation of SDR radios. I see it all the time. People going, oh, well, if I use a radio, I'm going to get direction found, or I'm giving away sensitive information. And I want to give credit where credit is due. It's amazing that people are thinking about emissions control and thinking about the liabilities that they expose themselves to when they use any tool, right? Not just a radio. So the flip side of that being is that it's important to understand and acknowledge that you are severely limiting your capabilities if that's the decision you make. That's a decision that's yours to make, as long as you're aware of what you are potentially cutting yourself off from. You know, why radios at all? Why radios in the first place? It's like Alex said when he talked about his experience with his artillery company. It's that you are able to coordinate efforts when you are geographically separated, right? And that's ultimately what radios serve to do, is to serve a bigger mission or a bigger initiative, not just in a vacuum itself, but in terms of a geographically or a structurally or a hierarchy complex system. You're able to facilitate that operation. So right. I get people being risk averse, but it is possible to be so risk averse that you cut off your access to capabilities and tools that you could potentially be employing and mitigating those risks versus just completely cutting yourself off from them.
Yeah, I love that. Like that, you know, brings us to a pretty conceptual discussion, but I think everything is a risk-based decision, and we have to weigh the risks that are associated with those different things, right? Like cost, right? Like cost is a risk, or whatever it is, but everything is a risk-based decision. I mean, you could walk across the street and get hit by a car tomorrow, but is that going to stop you from, you know, getting out of the house, right? Everything is a risk-based decision, and we need to objectively evaluate those risks and understand when we're exposing ourselves to risk, not doing it, you know, needlessly and unnecessarily or carelessly, but understanding the risk and then applying that at the critical moment to make the most out of the situation, right? So I love the conversation about risk in general. I think it's risk management and you know, risk-based decision making are super important to really anything, any discipline. But yeah, I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's better to over-prepare than under-prepare. I say, well, I have a Baoefeng. If it makes you feel better, I've two Baoefengs. I don't know where the charger is for either of them, so I have no chargers. Yeah. They're both out of battery.
Stellar.
I have dual tubes. I don't have a radio.
Good.
I am the stereotype. I am everything that you guys would make fun of. But this episode is like, I'm going to change this. I'm going to go on YouTube and I don't know, get my ham radio license and do the things, and then I think it'll be good. I think that this kind of a wake-up call for a lot of people, including myself, because almost everyone I can think of is kind of in a similar place to me. Some of them at least know how to change the frequency on theirs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
So circling back to, I guess not really circling back to, but leading into one area, there's a few things leading into this transition, but one area that there's a lot of interest in right now, and a tool that can help standardize those types of communication and can set people up to scale really well, and to the point where not everyone necessarily has to have the same degree of financial investment, is mesh networking. Now, mesh networking is a very, very broad umbrella that has everything from, a $30 LilyGo Echo to a Silva Streamcaster in it, which is a 5-figure radio. But mesh networking as a whole does a lot of things for its users in terms of how you implement it and how you maximize it. So what is a mesh network? A mesh network it's any type of, just like all other radios, it is a radio that transmits and receives data, but amongst them, they build out a web. I know you asked about, what is a repeater, and we mistakenly skipped over it, but every node in and of itself can transmit and receive, but it's also a repeater in that it receives a packet of data, even if it's not the intended recipient of that packet of data. It receives it and it passes it along, and it gets to the intended recipient for that packet of data, whether it's encoded voice or position location information via ATAC, whatever it may be. So that's what a mesh network is. And there's a lot of different protocols out there. The one I think people are the most familiar with is going to be Meshtastic. Right under that, in terms of brand recognition or brand awareness, would probably be something like Gotenna Pro. Those are two types of infrastructures of mesh networking, but they operate on that same principle of developing out a web of nodes that can communicate. And then, kind of at the peak of it, right at the top tier echelon, the really cool thing, the high speed thing that everyone knows, are the MANA radios, right? Your MPU5s and
like
your Silva string
systems.
casters.
Yeah.
Yep. That's going to be an MPU5. It is a mesh network. And it is a wearable mesh network, right? It's intended for the operator. Well, one of the things they can do is it can be worn by the operator on their body, right? So not all mesh networks can do that or are designed and lend themselves to that aspect. For example, most Meshtastic nodes I would not consider to be a very good wearable, despite what people may try to make them out to be. But yeah, that's one possible feature set of a mesh radio.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So yeah, it's really cool. I've seen guys, when we go teach RTO basics, hey, shameless plug, full disclosure, RTO basics, you can come take that with Mojave Repeater. We love it. But I taught I remember teaching a class somewhere with a group of students that had actually already developed out a Meshtastic network in their area, and they used it as part of their execution of the practical day, right, of the field exercise, which I thought was super cool because they had already begun to kind of think outside the box beyond just voice comms and be able to use a text message based app with a infrastructure that they owned to deliver a standardized report, right? A CASEVAC report would be an example of a standardized report. So that's another tool at people's disposal that if they want to look into scalability and being able to standardize the way they communicate. When I say standardize, I mean there's a general understanding of the way data is formatted, like a CASEVAC 9-line. That's another great tool that exists that people can be exploring.
Mm-hmm.
That
Definitely.
I remember seeing at SHOT Show, I think it was the Spirit of Systems booth. They had some persistent system stuff there, and they were streaming live through radio waves, so through a handheld radio. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm absolutely just mystified by this technology, so I could be saying whatever space magic sounds right in my head. They were streaming video feed from the hallway.
Yeah.
Over
that's
a fucking radio. That is really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, what's funny?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So what's funny? Again, going back to everything's a radio. We're streaming video over radios right now. The radios just happen to be on our laptops and our Wi-Fi router. But yeah, there are radios that are absolutely capable of that much bandwidth to where you can transmit and receive video information. That one, it's not only video, but it's encoded, right, and it's encrypted by whatever platform. In this case, the MPU5 is encrypted by, and there's still room in the pipeline for so much more across all of the nodes that exist in that network.
Yeah. I'm glad you started the discussion about mesh radios, because I think that people are highly interested in that, and a lot of that interest comes from seeing guys use things like ATAC. Like people want to know what is that phone on that guy's plate carrier for. It's not for watching Netflix. It's like there's a tool in that phone. It's ATAC, right? And that's enabled through transmitting data over radios. And there's just like we kind of what I talked about before was breaking down like that whole scale of the economy for voice radios and like the different capabilities that you can get at different cost levels that exists within the mesh ecosystem as well. And I think people, rightfully go to Meshtastic devices because it's number one, the only thing that they know. And there's a lot of brand recognition there with those devices, but also they're highly affordable. The Baoefeng or the mesh-tastic radio is like the analog of the Baoefeng for the mesh market. And just to kind of like lay out some of the different devices and their capabilities, right? You have like a mesh-tastic device at that low cost level, 50 to $100. That's going to give you, operating on open source mesh-tastic software, the ability with a third-party plugin to connect to ATAC and transmit that position and location information over ATAC. And then the cost scales with the capability depending on what you want to use. But there's things like Somewhere, right? Somewhere Labs makes some pretty neat mesh radios. Gotenna, right around the $1,000 range. Beartooth, all around the $1,000 range. Link Pro by Otto, that's another mesh radio. Even like between that low cost and that $1,000 like actual decent solution, there's stuff like Ubiquiti, right? Like Rocket Mesh radios, for example. Those are literally like 2.4 gigahertz access points, right? Like Wi-Fi access points that you can use to stream video. That's an IP-based mesh network, right? So means it's rooted in internet protocol. So you can network different devices without necessarily having boutique third-party plugins and integrations for those services like ATAC. Then going beyond that, I mean, you have, then you get into like your higher end Trellisware persistent systems, Silvus Streamcaster. Those might run you 5 figures, but then the capability just balloons even further to do voice, video streaming, ATAC, ROIP, have, ruggedized military grade enclosure with the right connectors on it to support your accessory ecosystem, right? A man portable wearable mesh radio. So that exists within every like vertical in the radio market. Is just this, there's tons of devices out there. People just don't know about it. But there are different cost levels, different levels of investment and capabilities at each of those levels.
Yeah. And another thing that's worth pointing out is that once you start getting into those, especially those IP-based systems, we very much have a culture in that we have standardized kit across all of our quote unquote operators, right? Whether it's a actual military unit or you and your buddies who train together, there's this concept, and it's a good concept, that everything should be standardized as much as possible. But when you start getting into those IP-based mesh tools or any type of IP-based tools, you don't necessarily have to have every single person own the same equipment to maximize the utilization of that gear. I'll give you an example, right? Let's say, once again, I had 2 fire teams operating geographically independent of each other, and we all wanted to be on ATAC together. Well, the common thought would be that all of them have to have an MPU5 or a Silvus Streamcaster. And in a perfect world, that's awesome. However, there are ways, if you get like a Wi-Fi dongle, or if you augment with some Gotenna nodes, to where only, let's say, like one RTO in one fire team had a Silvus Streamcaster and one RTO in the other fire team had a Silvus Streamcaster. All 10 guys, let's say it's a 5-guy fire team on each side, all 10 guys can have their EUDs, and they're either using a Wi-Fi dongle off of their RTO, or they have it somehow patched IP based. They didn't have to buy 10 Silvus Streamcasters. They just had to buy 2, but everyone is still looking at the same ATAC map on their Android phone that they got. So that way they could start to use the benefits of that tool. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And
the point he's getting to is basically, you can employ lower cost solutions at lower echelons that are more limited in capability. But the fact is that they're all talking the same language, right? Maybe not necessarily through RF, like a Gotenna won't talk to a Silvus Streamcaster, for example, through RF, like its air interface. But the fact that you can get that data on a device and it now becomes IP data, then you can network all different sorts of radios or push that data over the internet to a server, for example. But yeah, the power is in the flexibility, in the fact that they all speak the same language, which is IP based information, TCP, IP, or UDP.
What? Sorry, the TCPI. You said letters. You said letters, and I just
Yeah, I threw. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No,
So
it's okay.
basically,
We're
yeah.
monkey here, radio, send mesh network packets.
Mhm. Yeah.
I realize
So
I'm getting two subject matter experts to walk things down for
sorry. No, I
no,
think,
you're okay.
you bring up a good point. Like I've always tried to express things in a digestible manner. And sometimes I do like get away from myself a little bit
It's
and
okay.
start
It's
throwing
okay.
acronyms out there,
Yeah.
it's a problem. Like
No,
it is a
it's
huge
okay.
problem in the radio market, when people start throwing
We love
acronyms out.
acronyms.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. But
I
yeah,
think
so the
everything kind
whole
of like
TCP, the
yeah.
whole TCP and UDP thing is just like ways that they're protocols for the ways that packets are sent over a network. So like your UDP is your multicast, which means that a source, right, like a transmitter, let's say a radio, for example, is just transmitting those packets out to all subscribers, and whoever gets it, and whoever says I don't want that will not receive it. And then TCP is a more point to point, like direct protocol or manner in which a subscriber can receive that information. But it's just different ways that those packets of IP data are structured to be transmitted over a network, basically.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I'm a little new to this world, so I'm trying to kind of throttle the information in a way that if I can digest it, I feel like our listeners probably can. If things are starting to get away from me, then
Yeah.
maybe our listeners will still get it, and I'm just but it's interesting.
Yeah, one thing
Still,
that
I
I
feel like I've
always
said that a
found
lot of times through the show. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so one thing I found super interesting that really started to really open my mind to the way a commo person, a commo
Yeah.
person as part of a group, the certain skills they should maintain is Alex actually did a really cool video where he went over his radio go bag, and he
Yeah.
had a lot of networking tools in there as well. And if you're the communications guy, it would behoove you, or we would encourage you to get familiar with basic level networking as well, because at the end of the day, one, they are, like Wi-Fi is a type of radio and it's a tool you can use. But again, radios don't exist in a vacuum. We are part of facilitating a bigger mission set, a bigger operation. And any type of electronic communication, if you can maximize it and if you can make that available to your team, you're just going to be that much more of an asset to the people that you work with. And people are going to be able to count on you to solve a problem, right? If that problem is getting a video stream from point A to point B, hey, I have this tool that works, that fits that application. Here's how we implement it. Here's how we can maximize what we already have. And here's how we can make it digestible for the people on our team.
Yeah. What are the different pipes? What are the tools at your disposal? Being, flexible to maneuver within that space and apply different solutions to different problems. Yeah, great point.
We've answered more than I was expecting to. Way
Yeah.
more.
I think the feedback that I get from, I've done a couple podcasts, and I think that what the feedback that I commonly get is like, okay, this has basically created more questions almost than answers, and there's
it's a whole field of stuff. Like if I can make an example, it's like how to shoot a gun, like how to shoot a pistol. You can't cover that in a 2-hour podcast. You can't cover that in like 2 weeks. At least to any level of proficiency. A lot of that's like, hey, go home, do your own research, dry fire. Like, here's some things to point you in the right direction. Go do this. Like, it's disingenuous and kind of like intellectually insulting to say, hey, listen to this and you will learn the thing. And obviously, it's like anything worth learning is going to take time and effort. 100%, especially something just as complicated and important and technical as this.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I know we've hit on it, but that's again going back to the positive and the upwards trajectory. I'd like to think we're on an upwards trajectory in terms of comms proficiency. Is that people are willing to pay for quality, and people typically know when they're lacking, but it can be difficult to identify that first step, or it can be difficult to even consider that there are possible tools out there that would address a comms problem that people have. And the burden is on them to figure it out, but sometimes it takes a little bit of prompting to get pointed in the right direction. That's a big reason why, I know I'm probably going to date this episode a little bit, but more so than we already have. But that's why I made a really quick reel just giving people 5 different ways that they could talk beyond line of sight and or transmit data without being tied to a specific infrastructure. Because a lot of people were messaging me like, hey, I have this problem. I want to be able to use my Baoefeng to talk 3 states over. And they were identifying a problem, which is awesome, right? They're thinking clearly, they're starting to develop some context, but the tool that they had for it was a little bit of a mismatch. And that's not their fault. It's not because they didn't have any technical skill. The people that were asking me these questions were extremely intelligent, extremely technically inclined. It's just, they had not been exposed to the range of tools that exist, which is why, we try to prompt people on different options that they can be exploring and researching and looking into to find the best fit for the problem they have, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And unfortunately, you're right. There are the only ways to do that are, identify the problem, research it, and spend money, which, is everything. It's everything. I was looking at the price of better water filters the other day. Ooh, boy. Oh, man. But, it's important. Not drinking shit is important. Not dying of dysentery and not, having a fluoride stare 24/7. Kind of important.
Mm-hmm.
And anything worth doing is worth doing right.
Yeah, certainly. Absolutely.
Or wrong, just for memes, because it's funny.
Yeah.
It's so funny. Actually, the flip side, yes, anything worth doing is worth doing right. But anything worth doing is also worth doing poorly to start off with.
Yes.
Right? Comms
on that note, I think I'm going to go down to Ace Hardware and pick up some walkie-talkies.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Yeah.
Like you got to fail, you got to fail to learn.
Yeah.
Learn from your failures. Don't be afraid to fail,
100%.
Yeah.
And hell, I'm going to out myself as being, unprepared again. I bought a Redivis. I bought I think like a 1500 XS Motorola radio a while ago, and I had no idea what the hell to do with these things. I'm just like, okay, now I have Object. Object is just going to sit in my closet and do nothing, or it's going to look cool on my kit.
Yeah.
And that doesn't do any good for anyone, I don't think.
Yeah.
Right.
Certainly not to put you on the spot or dog on you more so than you already are aware of, but the best thing you can do, and this is why the Baoefeng is in a lot of ways a cool product, is it's such a low cost for you to get out there and just start experimenting and play with it, right? Get out there and use it as a tool, not even just the Baoefeng, but like the SDRs that are out there, the RTL SDRs. It's such a cheap tool to start to develop an understanding of what the electromagnetic spectrum looks like, that it's, in a lot of ways, it's really easy to justify to get into it and start tinkering, right? Start learning what you can find at what certain ranges of the electromagnetic spectrum. Start learning what your capabilities are in terms of like when you transmit on your radio, where do you see it light up on the electromagnetic spectrum? Because not only is that going to prompt more research and open your mind to how radios work, but going back to the concept of risk management, you can start to develop an understanding of why doing certain things is a risk and what risks are acceptable and what may or may not be acceptable to you, right? So get out there and tinker, right? Don't be afraid to tinker and play around. Don't get the FCC called on you. This is not legal advice.
Maybe don't transmit on frequency 420-690. Maybe don't do that.
Yeah.
or do
get
it,
out there and
if
tinker,
you get
man.
caught, tell me. Or if you don't get caught, don't tell me, because I don't want to know. If
Yeah.
I go down for someone
Yeah, but
else's
I'm
FCC
serious.
violation, I'm going to
Tickle
myself.
But yeah, no, I'm serious. Like, get out there and play with those tools that at least on some level, everyone probably has a Baoefeng or a Motorola
Yeah.
XTS
A lot of
2500 or a
people are,
Hytera. Like, start messing around with it.
yeah, at least aware they exist.
Yeah, certainly.
But yeah, that's something I really need to look at and talk to my friends and be like, hey, what happens here? I actually have a story, and it's not going to be super educational, but I really want your guys' take on this because Mitch.
Okay.
Mitch, he sent me a picture of that guy who set himself on fire for Palestine today with the caption, "This is you." Well, like effectively. And he mentioned like, oh, if the big toilet drinking water thing happens, like if things get really weird, I don't even want a fucking radio near me. I don't want to exist in the same strata as a radio. And that is an attitude I've heard a couple of times. I remember weirdly, this is a discussion I had with a random man in Las Vegas last year. He picked me up at SHOT Show for an Uber ride, and just like, oh, he sees my backpack and stuff. He's like, oh, you're here for the gun thing, aren't you? He ended up being like the most interesting guy I've probably ever met at rent. Is like just video game NPC experiences where you just like in
Yeah.
Grand Theft Auto, there's a person who's marked with a little exclamation mark on the map. This is one of those situations, and
Yeah.
it turns out he was concealed carrying, the silencer code Maxim 9.
You're kidding. It looks like a RoboCop
you,
gun.
You guys can't see this, but Alex just like blank stare, just like shook his head. Austin laughed his ass off.
In radio.
Like,
I'm so invested in radio stuff that I fully acknowledge I lack education in a lot of the other.
Imagine someone like concealed carrying a suppressed Desert Eagle, because that is effectively like the footprint. It is a RoboCop gun. It's ridiculous. He's this massive black guy, super nice, really awesome, and he, we're talking because I tell him about what I do. We have a long drive, and he was a SIGINT guy in the military, and he's talking about all these ways they tracked people down, and the ways they disguised antennas, and he's just like, man, I don't know. Now that I've done it, I've been on the other side of this. If shit ever goes wrong, and like this is the first time fucking meeting this guy. If shit ever goes wrong, after I finished my last tour in Iraq, I moved to the mountains in Nevada. There's no service out here. There's nothing. No cell service. I don't even have internet. Like, if anything ever got bad, like if I see like, I'm paraphrasing really hard. If I saw an electronic, if I saw a radio, I'm throwing it the fuck away, because that's how they get you. You're and I wanted your guys' opinion on that, because like that's the most interesting time I've heard something like that, but not the only time I've heard something like that. It's always from SIGINT dudes who are like, yeah, no, you transmit something, we're going to bomb the fuck out of you. Like we hear, yeah.
So I have some strong opinions about that, actually.
Yes, I figured you would.
Yeah. So I've seen it from both perspectives, because, my job in the military was as a communications guy. I also did DoD contracting as a SIGINT and EW guy. Yeah. So I think that perception comes from people's one of two things. It's either a lack of understanding about your risk profile and the way that you present yourself on the electromagnetic spectrum, or it's from actually interacting with the tools that we use to exploit those networks and having a false sense of overconfidence in those things, because it's not an omnipotent tool. It can't be everywhere all at once. What people fail to do, really what happens is, like, you get siloed into this discipline of doing this one thing, but you fail to see the full perspective of it. Take that step back and assess the scenario. And really what you need to do when you're employing a specific capability, or radio, things like that, is understand the risk profile, right? Understand and make a valid assessment of the adversary's capabilities and what they bring to bear against that asset that you are going to employ. And then maybe make a decision to use something else, right? Or, to cut that off at a certain, with respect to a certain like geographic area, for example. But you have to do those assessments in order to, fully understand your risk and the way that you present yourself. It's basically, it's called like signature management and emissions control. And there's it like we're just very naive in the DoD and in this community with respect to that thing, right? But yeah, I would say it goes back to not self-denying a capability for any reason, right?
Yeah.
When you start shooting bullets, that in and of itself is a visual and audible signature that you are there, you are in a specific place. So you are going to give it up eventually.
Yeah.
It's just, where do you draw that line? And you can be very careful about where you draw that line if you can fully understand your capabilities of your equipment, the capabilities of the adversary's equipment, and your risk profile, and what risk you're willing to accept. But yeah, I do definitely have strong feelings about that because people mess it up all the time.
Yeah.
That's a really good input. And I can speak to kind of my opinion on that as somebody who's a little bit further upstream from Alex, in that I'm still very much developing out my journey, because I had a moment like that. Actually, it was hanging out with Alex, and he was showing me some of the tools that he had. I'm not going to say where the tools were located. It's not my place to share that. But Alex was showing me some of the tools he had, some of the signals intelligence tools that exist. And I remember thinking, I'm like, wow, I'm never touching a fucking microwave, let alone a radio, because it is terrifying what these tools are capable of. Yeah. And then, further down from that, nothing classified. They're all stuff that could exist on the commercial market. But it was one of those things where like, wow, this is really scary. But then I took as a student, the radio direction finding class, and realizing that, and I hope I'm not giving too much of the class away, but the training wheels are on for you to be able to radio direction find in this class, right? All the parameters for you to have a layup are there through the class. They're slowly taken away. Alex does a really good job of managing those training wheels and setting students up for learning and success. But even that was extremely difficult, right? Having to hoof it and shoot azimuths and account for the variance that exists in my radio direction finding radio, and even just having the manpower and the wherewithal to decide to employ signals intelligence in the first place. They're all possible places that you can fall within the cracks, right? If that makes sense. So At the end of the day, there's still the human factor there, right? Like, is someone gonna go patrol and cover enough geographic area that they can get a fix on your location in the first place? Are they even thinking to do that? Do the SDRs they have the range to be able to detect the radios you're using in the first place? Because there, believe it or not, there are some radios out there that are commercially available that you can talk on, and your standard RTL SDR, the range of it is narrow enough that those radios exist beyond it, and you just would have difficulty detecting them, right? Yeah. So it is a reality, right? Signals intelligence and radio direction finding is a reality, but it's not the boogeyman as people make it out to be.
Oh man, I absolutely agree. I do think that and I think this is applied to a lot of things. I was talking about this in the Orion Training Group episode, and talking about this. And like, I feel like this comes up every couple of weeks, denying yourself a capability or a piece of kit or whatever, because you look at it and go like, oh, I'll never need X because Y, or like, this is exactly
Mm-hmm.
what's going to happen. I'm going to walk directly into the woods, so all I need is a Smursh belt and 15 magazines and so, and like, anyone who gets a micro rig is stupid because why? Like, you don't know what's going to happen. You can have educated guesses, you can make a plan for yourself, but it may not apply to all people. And I do agree that cutting yourself off from capabilities, because not every capability has to be used in offense, and those that are can be used sparingly if you're an intelligent person who knows when and what to do. Like,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, not everything can be like the flaming rock.
Yeah.
Which is I realize, again, not actually a flaming rock. It's something used to signal in the military. I need to also not use terminology that the random person who's listening to this probably hasn't heard of. But like, I digress entirely. I'm following all of this and just being like, oh, yes, that makes sense. My whole team's going to get Motorola walkie-talkies now, and they're really cheap. They're $20 each. Because they can't be picked up an SDR from a certain range.
It's exactly what I said, Nathan. 100%.
100%.
Didn't
That's
miss
my
it.
takeaway. That's exactly what you meant. I appreciate you giving people that very specific advice on what to consume. This is not a bit. This is not a joke.
Yeah.
Go buy Motorola radios with the coupon code Art and War 10. Go to www.meetspin.com to buy them.
Yeah.
That's where they're hosted. The limited edition radios. I'll do a backflip too first. If it's more entertaining and it makes you more likely to buy them.
So it's funny you say that, right?
Yeah.
And anybody that can identify, just because you could identify a drawback with a tool doesn't necessarily make it a bad tool, right? I know a lot of people that ask me after the cell phone outages, they're like, hey, well, let's say I want to talk to my family 2 states over, and they're not technically literate. I'm not technically literate. I have a little bit of disposable income. What's the solution? Yeah. I said Starlink, right? That was the answer I gave to a couple guys based on the information they had given me. And they said, well, like, can't Space Force like turn off the satellites? Which to one degree, is a valid concern. They understand, and they're at least able to identify that that's still not infrastructure that they 100% own. Yeah. However, it's part of that, like, being realistic and risk management. What is it you are trying to combat, and what is it you're trying to mitigate with these specific tools, right? If it's a localized emergency, like, so like a hurricane or a snowstorm or something, that's not going to affect the global infrastructure of SpaceX, right? A multi-billion-dollar corporation. And so when you frame these tools around realistic expectations, and when you think a little bit critically about what it is you're trying to address, some of those drawbacks start to look a lot less scary, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
No, I agree.
So that's the other thing, is that people ask about, they're like, hey, well, what does it take to do XYZ with comms? And sometimes the answer is a lot of technical skill. HF radio, which is something you described, witnessing a friend doing, talking from North Carolina to Colorado. That was, I almost guarantee, that was HF, right?
Yes.
That is such an art that requires the second level of licensing for your ham license. And it's such an art, and it requires such a technical skill to be able to execute on, that if that's a tool you want to take advantage of, you're more than welcome to. But just be realistic with yourself about the competencies and the disciplines that are needed in order to maximize that tool, right? If you want that easy button answer, understand that's a farce, right? It might be an easy button answer to a specific problem, but there is going to be a degree of discipline that goes into you being able to execute on that tool with ease. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So my big takeaway from this is buy Baoefeng, buy walkie-talkie.
Oh yeah,
buy Baoefeng. Yeah.
Yes. Are there any big like how to get started, like radios for dummies, guides for dummies that you guys would recommend online, YouTube, anything like that? Now that knowledge and learning is so open source now, I love it. It's like my favorite thing. But is there anyone that you know of that you'd recommend that would get people started off on like a base level?
That's a great
I'm
question.
really biased, but I love the Mojave Repeater RTO Basics course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In all seriousness,
Who are those guys?
I took that
They're
class
dicks.
as a student. Yeah, who are they?
Yeah.
Assholes. No, in all seriousness, I took it as a student. I loved it. I think it's an amazing curriculum. And now I'm an instructor for it. If guys do want to really start, one, understand the science behind radios and start to develop out those critical thinking skills to identify problems and identify tools that address those problems, the RTO Basics course is a great one to start with. And I know that's a shameless plug, and I don't care. That's my answer.
Yeah. I think, I would say, like, yeah, the RTO Basics, right? Obviously, we sell that course. It's
Is that
structured
online?
in
Is that
no, so it's an in-person class, and there's a reason for that. I'll get to that in a second. But basically, like, there's a lot of great free resources, free institutional knowledge and education in the ham radio community. And the barrier to entry is so low. I mean, it costs like $15 to go take the ham test and get licensed, and then just show up to your ham club and start learning about RF propagation and things like that. I would say, there's probably guides that you can find online about how to program a Baoefeng or press all the buttons, like what all the buttons do, right? The way that I've structured like the RTO Basics is that it is this blend of the RF theory to understand the science behind why radios work, how they work,
why are
the
radios?
buttonology. What's that?
Why are radios? Why
Right.
radios?
Yeah.
Sorry, the wording of that was funny, and I had autism. Sorry.
Yeah,
go on.
why radios in the first place? But it blends like that RF theory, the science, with some of the buttonology, right? The operator level principles, as well as the planning factors to kind of bring that together to give you a well-rounded picture with the context that we have, designed that course for this community, right? There's not a place that I've seen that like does that holistically. So, once again, shameless plug for the course, but you can kind of gain the knowledge of all of these things in like a fragmented manner if you're willing to commit the time to kind of go hunt that information down. And it's going to be like a several year learning process, which is what it took me, several years to really gain a true understanding of how all those things come together. But yeah, that's why it's presented in that way in the course. I do think, obviously, the barrier to entry there is the cost. I do think that there is value. A lot of people have asked me, why don't I teach it online? But every course is different in terms of the pace that the students uptake the knowledge and the questions that they ask, and having that dialogue with the audience is extremely important to people's understanding and learning, an ability to learn that information faster than they would just watching a video that they can't interact with online. And then, the capstone to that is applying that, right? Having somebody there to guide you through the practical application so that you can apply the knowledge that you've learned in the first day of the class, right? So you can't necessarily get that if you're lone wolf solo trying to learn watch videos. It's very much like buying the radio and then it just sits in the closet because you don't understand it, right? Just having the knowledge alone is also not enough to develop that full understanding. So that's why we do the practical application and we put those things to the test.
What would you recommend for someone who, may live in the middle of nowhere, like butt fuck Idaho, butt fuck,
No.
I don't know, like Tennessee, something like that? Well, you guys run the course of Arizona, right?
So we do it actually all around the country. I travel, Austin will travel to teach the course in all sorts of different locations. We do end up in a lot of random bumfuck places that people have like, the critical thing is land, right? Just being able to go out into the environment, not on necessarily private property, but like spreading out on public land to be able to push those radios to their limits. So we do travel a lot. I will say, like if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, I cannot travel for the course, it's not near me, there's no, nothing, like go to hamstudy.org, start reading through those flashcards and learning the RF theory that will set you up for success to take the class. Then once you have that license, you should go for the technician, which is the base level license, and the general class, which is like the second tier. You can knock those out simultaneously if you study the material. But that just opens up your horizons to be able to have somebody on the other end to talk to, which gives you a realistic frame of reference for the capabilities and limitations of the equipment that you're purchasing. So that would be my recommendation, is definitely explore ham licensing and put that stuff into practice by talking to somebody who you might not be a part of your immediate community. But
Yeah. And then, kind of flip side, the other thing that the tool or the other tools and resources that you get out of RTO Basics, and this was what blew me away the most, because going into it, I knew a lot of the radio, the science behind it, and the buttonology and programming and chirp. What really blew my mind and what I thought was super cool that I could not get anywhere else was learning how to take these concepts and fit them into an actual, I'm going to use the military term, operation, but your operation can be search and rescue. It can be a vacation. It can be anything that requires a step-by-step process in which certain conditions have to be met along the way. That I got that out of RTO Basics, which was incredible. It got me thinking about like how to fit within the tempo of an operation, how to work with a team, how do we standardize the communication we're using so we're not talking too much and adding confusion and missing out on context. I think those resources and those tools are just as important and just as big of a part played, maybe even in some ways a bigger part played for people who are into radios and they come take RTO Basics. I think those are really big benefits. I think if people are looking for any types of tools or resources that they could start doing that themselves, is research how to write an op order, right? An op ord. Research how those are developed. Oh, perfect! Go read that guide.
5-paragraph op ord.
Again,
Yeah.
Again, I know this will be the third time I say it on this episode, but radios don't exist in a vacuum. You are there to facilitate something, and if you understand that there's a process and procedure that goes into accomplishing a goal, you can learn and you can start to brainstorm and think about different ways that you can be an effective team player in that bigger execution of an objective.
Yeah. I like that. Anyways, guys, we're coming up on 2 hours. And I feel like there's so much information. My brain feels like it's slightly swelling. But you've convinced me successfully to consume the ham radio licensing test. I know that there's a lot of good
it's worth it,
stuff
man.
on YouTube about that. I'm probably going to look. I've been putting this off since when did I go to North Carolina? A few months ago, a hot minute ago. But yes, if you're listening to this, again, ignore everything they said. Consume radio. You can buy your way to skill. You don't even need a radio. That's how 100%. The government will get you. Go to your nearest gun show and buy a Saturday Night Special instead. They're dope. I fucking love these things. It's so retarded. God. No, I got kicked out of the last gun show I went to. I was just like going to table, just like trying to find out what to buy through mouthfeel.
Yeah.
I didn't like that very much. But
We're gonna
in
get
all,
Are we gonna get a desk pop for the podcast?
a desk pop. Oh,
Do it.
God. This thing is so dirty from
You
like
won't.
20 rounds going through it. It does not work anymore. Actually,
What's
I've
one
been
more
clean.
at that point?
You know, fair point. Fair point. Here, let me just put this under my chin. This was a very serious episode up until the end. I hope people gleaned good information. But really, buy Saturday night specials. Go to gun shows, or possibly across state lines. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what I'm talking about. Don't listen to me. Do not transmit on channel 420-690. It is bad, and you need your license to do that. But in all
It's been a naughty
seriousness,
boy, Nathan.
I really appreciate the heads up. I still want to do a guide with you guys. Just like, hey, retard, here's what you do to get into radios. I think that'd be good for a lot of people, and especially we'll see the feedback.
Certainly.
Like, hey, if you're listening to this right now and you want a guide on this, send me a message. And if I don't reply to it, send me another message because I'm awful at checking.
Yeah.
But I think that'd be good for a lot of people, because I really do stand by the fact that, like, for everyone I know, including me, and I will call myself out for this, radio has always been a skill where it's like, I'll do it tomorrow. It's fine. I'll do it next week. And then next thing you know, the entire East Coast has cell outages, and I'm in the West, so it wasn't too bad. But it could happen anywhere. All because it didn't happen here last week doesn't mean it won't happen here tomorrow. I think it is, communication is one of the things that everyone should figure out. And being reliant on cellular infrastructure is not great. Being reliant on any infrastructure long term isn't great. So you should, if you're listening to this, take this into your own hands and buy a Baoefeng and a Motorola fucking walkie-talkie.
Yeah,
the government can't track you that way.
And even if you're not big into comms, if you have if your group has a comms guy, but you're just kind of listening, start to think about. Start to. I don't. I'm going to sound so schizo. Open your eyes. No. Start to think outwardly about how many things around you is a radio, and what space of the electromagnetic spectrum does that radio maybe or possibly occupy. And if you really think about it, go look it up. Because once you start to see how much of the world around you is built around radios, you can start to think about ways you could develop that at a micro level to maximize this technology that exists for your group, right? I get it. You probably can't build out a whole cell tower system, you and your buddies, just in your backyards. But maybe you could do a mesh-tastic network, right? Or maybe you could put a repeater on top of a local business, like Alex said. So
or hell, in a tree somewhere.
It's no mistake. It's no mistake, and it's not accidental that you, as that average person, don't have to think about these. That's very intentional. So yeah, kind of start to think past that. Think beyond. This button opens my garage, and start to think about, well, how does it do that, right?
Yeah.
So that's a little piece of advice I have.
I did get one of those little flipper zeros a little while ago.
That's what I was gonna. That was about what I was about to say.
Yeah.
I got one here with me. I am convinced that these were banned, or in part banned, not because they're dangerous or any more dangerous than plenty of other things that exist on the commercial market right now.
Yeah.
But I think these really got people thinking about how much of the world around them works on radio waves, and how easy, like Alex was saying, how easy it is to start developing out your own infrastructure. Because if you have your own infrastructure, it's a lot harder to take things away from you, which is why I think these were so heavily regulated. Because they got people thinking Canada, that way.
I
really?
Remember, yeah, I think last week. I think they're really fucking cool. I do think
Yeah.
I know some infosec people who are like, oh no, this is dumb. You do everything that this can with a laptop, but you're like, yeah, however, it's
Yeah.
popularizing it,
But
and it's something that fits in my
yeah,
pocket. And I've done a couple little,
exactly.
legal pen testing things with it. I have my gym card on there, and
Mhm.
I've experimented
Yeah.
enough with it to go like, oh, this is really cool. And for legal reasons, this
Right.
is a lie. I never paid for parking in the big city,
Right.
but
Hell yeah. Like you said, these kind of not really trivializes, but they kind of make light of the technology, the tools that exist out there. They make them fun. I can play Tetris on this thing, which I think is
yeah,
hilarious.
yeah, it's great. I want to put Doom on
But
it.
yeah, but what
Actually,
is
wait,
cool
no, I
about it,
do have
right?
Doom on
From
it.
what I think, and I think Isaac did a T-Rex video on it, is that this is really cool because it gets people thinking, right? It's not just like mindless doom scrolling on Instagram. It gets you thinking about the art of the possible, right?
Yeah.
This is only a few steps removed from learning how to build out your own ubiquity system so you and your buddies can have comms and data stream your thermals for when the big hot dog eating contest kicks off.
Yeah.
I love that. Anyways, guys, before we wrap up, dad advice.
Ooh, that's a
Ooh,
good
you go
question.
first, Alex.
Let's see. Dad advice. Damn, that's a great question. I don't have good dad advice. Change your socks. Take some ibuprofen. That's all I got. Put your head down. Do some good hard work.
Yeah, those are all great pieces of advice. My dad advice. You never know who you're talking to in social settings. You could be talking to someone who looks like he's just another face at the party and he owns the building. Treat every single person with dignity and respect, like they're a human being. The guy that's serving tables at the restaurant you're at could very well be the owner, and he's covering for a guy that called in sick. You never know who you're talking to, and keep that in mind when you interact with people.
Yeah.
You're a much better dad than I am. Me and my dog drink beer on the couch. That's about it. That's my.
I kind of trust everyone by default, and it's something that I have to work on. Like multiple friends, independent of each other and not knowing, call me a golden retriever, and I swear to God, the next person who does that, I'm going to put a bullet in my head. Which is the least golden retriever thing to do. At least I think I've never heard of a golden retriever committing like a sudden and violent suicide. Fuck. Yeah, but yeah, no, I'd like to say like going into situations and assuming the best of people has generally paid off for me.
Mm-hmm.
In the few times that it hasn't, it really hasn't. But I do think most people in this space are good. We said this at the beginning, like it's just like that 1 out of 20 that are bad can be pretty bad. But I'm very thankful not to have an experience that's been really terrible yet. That being said, my dad advice: buy Saturday night specials. Just have like a ton of them. Have so many
Hell yeah
dog shit guns you do not know what to do with them, and then give them to your local homeless population.
So they can shoot down the
buy
drone.
your local homeless guy. Buy your local homeless guy a Baoefeng.
buy them all Baoefengs.
I'll give them
start
all
training them in
Baoefengs.
asymmetrical warfare.
Yeah.
Fund the entire thing by having them raid a Costco parking lot and stealing all the catalytic converters.
Yeah.
Okay. Last thing. Before we wrap up, you guys chill yourselves. Tell us one last time where we can find you and what you're about, both personally and Mojave Repeater.
Yeah. So Mojave Repeater stuff you can find at mojaverepeater.com or on Instagram. We're also putting out YouTube videos at. I wish I had more time to do this, but I do want to continue to develop that channel, so you can find it on YouTube. what I'm about, bias for action. Don't sit and rest on your laurels. Go forth and do great things. Become an asset to yourself, your family, your team. It's all within you. Austin?
Yeah, very, very similar. If you want any help with radio stuff, if you email Mojave Repeater, I might be one of the guys you talk to. You come take a class, I might be one of the guys. You can find me on Instagram, just my name, Austin Joe Miller. What I'm about, my day job is I'm actually a marketing consultant, and my company is called East Corner Industries. And just like Alex said, I specialize in companies that sell products that make people an asset to their community, make people capable of defending themselves, defending others, and standing up for what they love and the American way. So that's me.
And I want to throw a huge plug out there also for Austin, East Corner Industries. So I've watched, you develop like over the course of a couple of years within this industry. Austin has been a humble actor, behind the scenes where you may not realize he's contributed, but like to company's brand image. He's worked with some major players within the industry, and he's been a great mentor to me with respect to the marketing aspects and things of that nature. Hugely talented photographer, excellent brand strategist. I mean, your marketing is phenomenal. So huge really plug to you for that.
And you've worked with some really good companies too.
I don't like talking about myself. Can we talk about how much Alex has helped me with my radio journey? Sure. So that way it's balanced out. No, for real. We got a great crew here. Alex is amazing. I love my job. I'm constantly learning. Man, I'm just excited to be here,
Hell yeah.
But thank you. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you saying that.
Of course.
Anytime. And thank you guys for coming on. I appreciate the
thanks for having
knowledge
us, dude.
transfer. Yeah. And I got a lot out of it, and I think other people will too.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Okay, bye.